It is the 5th model of the Ghost in the Shell 2045 collaboration, as well as a distant relative to the one we've already had up to this point, KKS02 Oil Clay. This one is KKS04 Makaizothink, coming with a kit of anti-CG, Giga Gatling, Hyper Missile, wheeled legs, and the leg ability of Adapter, which grants an A rank to all terrains across the board, period, no questions asked. This alone makes Makaizothink fantastic for pretty much any kind of situation you'd want to put him in, either as a pure set or as mixed parts, given that even though wheeled legs were usually the most picky with their terrain compatibility, Adapter takes that and throws it out the window, but I will touch on that briefly in just a moment. Anti-CG essentially is a melee variant of the other skill that we saw on Takanome, which is ACG Shot. In this case, it's essentially a melee variant, and just to explain it briefly, instead of checking your internal Metaforce charge gauge for bonus damage, much like you would expect of Ghost or Ghost Shot, it's anti-CG and ACG Shot by extension. Instead, check the opponent's charge gauge for punish damage. So naturally, the higher and more punish damage that you've given, the more damage you put on your opponent, closer to them getting ready to launch a Metaforce nuke on you, anti-CG is a perfect way to counteract that and even nip it in the bud before they have a chance to actually even consider using the skill, with all that extra bonus damage they would get just by having a full charge. This alone already puts bots like Cross Messiah and Cross Messiah Z on the chopping block, as someone you have to be really careful using full charge around if you don't want to get punished for it. Giga Gatling we've seen a pretty fair couple of times now at this point going forward, but essentially it is a conventional and higher end shooting skill that is a scattered AoE, meaning it damages one part normally at normal damage, and then 2 others at random at 1/3 damage. In addition, however, it does also have passive defense ignore, and it also gives you a times 1.5 damage bonus as long as your legs are intact. And then of course with the left arm of Hyper Missile, which is a gunpowder based skill, instead of it being an AoE much like any other missile or napalm type skill would be, Hyper Missile instead is pierce damage, meaning it's a little more conventional and easier to use, and a lot easier to string breaking a lot of parts at once with, as you would expect from any other conventional combat part, melee or shooting all the same. Now, with them being a high artillery type, Makaizothink also is packing pretty much the armor and the specs to match it. So he can not only talk the talk, but he can also wheel the deal in this case. With a head armor of almost 4,000 HP, both arms about 3,100, and legs at almost 4,000 as well, 3,900 for him, he can honestly tank hits pretty solidly and still keep on kicking. His leg stats also are pretty solid too. A melee resist to 844 really isn't too bad, not super terrible either, but definitely something that you want to try to stay on the higher end of and try to avoid melee fighters when possible. A shoot resist of 1103 honestly does kind of make this up just a little bit though, as someone who can tank a hit and keep on kicking. An evade at 683 isn't necessarily great either, but given that he is a wheel-based leg, this is honestly relatively forgivable in some cases. But his mobility of 935, even though this is par for the course for a wheel-based leg like what he has, it's the fact of his leg ability that makes this stand out even more so. The leg ability of Adapter, which changes all terrain matches, except Cyber of course, to A rank, which is a solid and flat 10% to all leg stats, no matter the terrain you're on. Naturally, of course, minus Cyber, which is 20 to everybody. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So honestly, he's packing some fantastic skills, really nice specs too across the board, with a kit that honestly makes him very easy to use and very highly sought after. For these reasons, as a pure set score, I do have to rate him a very solid, very easily solid 8 out of 10. In some cases, I would even consider a 9, given that he is very well balanced in what he does offer, even though he does have a melee skill tossed in there, which will make capitalizing on either on anti-CG or his shooting skills kind of tricky to make use of. He honestly does make up for it pretty easily with everything else he offers across the board. And as mixed parts, on the other hand, I have to rate him absolutely, without a doubt, a 9 out of 10. All of his skills are fantastic, they can be used anywhere, and they are incredibly flexible, albeit of course his head and his right arm are heavy, which is something that you will kind of have to factor around when building teams, but honestly that is still very easily met without any issue all the same. It's very likely in this case his legs are going to be the big ticket item if you are going to be going after Makaizothink in this case. Now, one other thing to mention on Makaizothink as a closing thought is the fact that he is also a gender N type, meaning that his parts are compatible with both male and female type tin pets. So in instances such as, say, modified and limited PvP rounds, or even EX trials that limit male or female, this is a great way to kind of overcome that and still keep some high-end firepower without having to make any sacrifices.